What happens when a luxury car dealership mocks an elderly black couple, only to discover they're the parents of a billionaire? What unfolds next is not just justice, it's transformation. From silent humiliation to national reckoning, this true story will shatter assumptions and stir your soul. Stay with us as we uncover every twist in this extraordinary tale. Eyes sparkles, comment below, where are you watching from? Thumbs up, like, repeat button, share, and bell subscribe to help us spread this message of dignity and respect. Part 1. Mistaken at first glance. The morning sun filtered gently through the glass windows of the lavish Ariston Motors showroom, casting golden hues on polished chrome and sparkling chandeliers. An elderly couple stepped through the front entrance, their presence quiet yet noticeable. Harold and Lorna Whitman, both in their 70s, were dressed modestly. Harold wore a faded button-up shirt tucked neatly into his well-worn trousers, and Lorna's pastel dress was simple, matched with a cardigan and practical shoes. Their hands clasped, they walked slowly toward the rows of gleaming vehicles, each one worth more than most homes. Though the couple moved gently and with quiet admiration for the automobiles, judgment had already begun to take shape. All around them, the mood shifted. Employees paused. A few customers leaned closer to whisper. Eyes scanned the Whitmans, not with curiosity but with skepticism. The couple's dark skin and modest attire stood out in this world of tailored suits and designer handbags. From across the room, a sales associate named Derek Langston approached. Dressed in an expensive tailored suit with slicked-back hair and a practiced smirk, Derek exuded confidence, bordering on arrogance. His footsteps echoed sharply as he closed the distance. With arms crossed and a half-smile, he offered what appeared to be a polite greeting but was laced with sarcasm. "I think you might be lost," he said, voice smooth but condescending. "These vehicles start at $900,000. Perhaps the pre-owned lot would be a better fit?" Harold blinked in confusion. "We're just here to take a look," he said evenly, his voice calm but firm. But Derek had already turned slightly, letting his dismissive tone and gaze linger. From behind Derek, a few customers chuckled. An employee nearby stifled a grin. Lorna tightened her grip on Harold's hand, her eyes beginning to glisten with tears she refused to shed. Humiliated yet composed, the couple exchanged a glance. Without raising their voices, they turned and walked toward the exit. The cold marble beneath their feet felt even colder now. Behind them, Derek leaned against a counter with smug satisfaction, unaware that his arrogance would soon face consequences far greater than he could imagine. Outside, the Whitmans paused on the sidewalk, the sun warm but unable to thaw the chill they felt within. Their pain was quiet, but deep. They had not raised their voices, nor created a scene. But the wound of being judged, not for who they were, but for how they looked, cut sharply. Unbeknownst to everyone in that showroom, the story was just beginning. And it would become one that would leave a permanent mark not only on Derek Langston, but on every person who watched the events that would follow. Part 2. The tables turned the following morning, as staff at Ariston Motors opened the dealership. Two sleek, one-of-a-kind Rolls-Royce boat-tail vehicles slowly pulled up to the glass front. Their glistening black paint reflected the rising sun like a mirror, drawing the attention of passers-by and employees alike. A buzz swept through the showroom. As the doors of one of the cars opened, Harold and Lorna Whitman stepped out, wearing the very same modest clothes they had worn the day before. But this time, their steps were confident, their posture dignified. They were followed by their son, Malcolm Whitman, an accomplished CEO known across the tech industry for building one of the largest startups in the region. Malcolm was sharply dressed in a tailored navy suit, his presence magnetic. He walked with poise, flanked by his parents as they entered the dealership once more. Gasps and whispers erupted instantly among staff and customers. Derek Langston, the sales associate who had so carelessly dismissed the Whitmans the day before, stood frozen near the reception desk. His smirk evaporated. "Isn't that the same couple from yesterday?" one employee whispered. "And the man with them, that's Malcolm Whitman." He's worth hundreds of millions. Derek's face turned pale. His eyes darted around for an escape route, but it was too late. Malcolm's gaze locked on him, unreadable but resolute. Without raising his voice, Malcolm spoke clearly enough for everyone to hear. My parents came here yesterday. They were treated as though they didn't belong, because of their appearance. That ends today. The manager appeared, alerted by the commotion. He tried to speak, but Malcolm held up a hand. We're not here for apologies. We're here to correct the record. Malcolm gestured to the vehicles outside. Both of these are being purchased today. One for each of my parents. And I want the commission from both sales to go directly to the only employee who showed them kindness. A ripple of astonishment filled the room. Malcolm turned to Emily Torres, a junior associate who had stood silently the day before, her heart aching at the injustice. Emily, thank you. Your compassion didn't go unnoticed. Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she stepped forward. I only did what was right. Malcolm nodded. And that's exactly why you'll be promoted, effective immediately. You're now the senior client relations manager. The manager clapped in support. A few other employees joined. Customers who had witnessed the scene the day before now looked at the Whitmans with a mixture of admiration and guilt. As for Derek, he stood paralyzed. The manager turned to him slowly, voice firm. You'll report to HR immediately. Ariston Motors does not tolerate discrimination in any form. The dealership, once filled with quiet contempt, now hummed with reflection. What began as an insult ended in revelation. The Whitmans had not only reclaimed their dignity, they had sparked a reckoning. Malcolm placed a hand gently on his mother's shoulder. This, he whispered, is how we change the world. One moment of dignity at a time. Part 3, a reckoning on display. The fallout from the Whitmans' dignified return was swift and undeniable. As news of the incident and the subsequent gesture spread, Ariston Motors found itself at the center of local headlines and social media conversations. But for Malcolm, the real focus wasn't the public image, it was the principle. Later that afternoon, Malcolm returned alone. He requested to meet with the dealership's regional director and insisted on reviewing the security footage from the day of the incident. The request was granted. Malcolm sat in silence as the video played. Derek's condescension, the chuckles from co-workers, the smug dismissal of his parents. After watching the footage, Malcolm asked a simple question: what policies are in place to prevent this from happening again? The regional director, now visibly unsettled, responded, we have mandatory inclusivity training, but clearly, more needs to be done. Malcolm didn't raise his voice. It's not about training. It's about culture. He paused. I'm willing to fund a program. An independent initiative that trains all staff not just to avoid discrimination but to actively cultivate empathy. It won't be about policies on paper. It'll be about changing hearts. The director agreed. Later that week, Derek Langston was officially dismissed from Ariston Motors. A press release followed, announcing the dealership's collaboration with Malcolm Whitman's foundation to create one of the nation's first in-house empathy development programs for sales professionals. As for Emily Torres, she became the face of a new Ariston campaign, Character Sells. Her story, standing up in silence and being rewarded in public, resonated with many. In the end, the Whitmans' quiet grace and their son's measured yet powerful actions transformed humiliation into progress. Ariston Motors wasn't just selling luxury anymore, it was learning the true cost of dignity. And thanks to one moment of misjudgment, followed by one family's refusal to accept it, a whole industry began to reflect on what truly defines value. Part 4, a shift in culture. In the weeks that followed, the story of the Whitmans at Ariston Motors didn't fade, it ignited a broader dialogue across the city. Major publications, influencers, and corporate leaders shared the story, and within days, other dealerships around the country began re-evaluating their customer interaction protocols. At Ariston Motors, change was more than symbolic. Emily Torres, now in her new role as Senior Client Relations Manager, led the first of many workshops alongside facilitators from the empathy training initiative Malcolm had funded. Employees sat in small circles, engaged in discussions that broke down stereotypes, encouraged introspection, and called for accountability. Posters bearing the campaign slogan, "Character Sells," appeared throughout the showroom. What had once been a space driven by appearances and assumptions was now filled with reminders that every person who walked through the door carried a story, and deserved respect. For Harold and Lorna, the transformation brought a sense of closure. The pain they experienced hadn't vanished, but seeing the culture shift with such speed and sincerity reassured them that their suffering hadn't been in vain. They visited the dealership quietly one afternoon to thank Emily again, this time bringing a homemade apple pie, something Lorna had baked from scratch. "It's not much," Lorna said, smiling shyly, "but it's from the heart." Emily teared up, hugging Lorna warmly. "It means everything." Meanwhile, Malcolm was contacted by CEOs, civil rights organizations, and education leaders. Everyone wanted to know how the empathy training was structured, how it worked, and how they could bring it into their own spaces. Malcolm responded the same way each time: "It starts with listening." Back at the dealership, one final moment closed the loop. A new client, a middle-aged woman with paint-stained jeans and a frizzy ponytail, walked into the showroom. She glanced at the cars and looked uncertain. A young salesman, newly hired and trained under the new initiative, walked toward her with a warm smile. "Welcome to Ariston Motors. May I help you find something?" She nodded, slightly surprised. "I'm just browsing." He replied with genuine cheer, "Then let's browse together." Above them, sunlight filtered through the same glass ceiling where judgment once cast shadows. Now, it reflected a clearer, kinder light. Ariston Motors had changed. And thanks to the quiet dignity of one couple, the courage of one employee, and the conviction of a son, it would never be the same again. Part 5. Full circle. 3 months had passed since the day Malcolm Whitman turned a humiliating encounter into a movement of change at Ariston Motors. The story of Harold and Lorna Whitman had traveled far beyond the dealership. It had sparked podcasts, essays, and speaking engagements. It was even cited in boardrooms where DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, policies were being rewritten. Inside Ariston Motors, the cultural shift was no longer a promise but a practice. Derek Langston had become a cautionary tale across the industry. Emily Torres, now promoted to Regional Client Engagement Director, led monthly team sessions where staff shared stories, not of sales made, but of biases overcome and humanity honored. But it was one chilly autumn morning that brought everything full circle. Harold and Lorna returned quietly to Ariston Motors, this time with no cameras, no press, and no son beside them. Lorna carried a small gift bag, and Harold clutched an envelope. They asked for Emily, who came down from her new upstairs office in a blazer she'd never imagined herself owning when she first started in the showroom. "We just wanted to say thank you," Harold said, his voice soft with emotion. "Not just for standing up, but for changing things." Lorna handed over the gift bag. Inside was a framed photo of the three of them standing beside the Rolls-Royce, taken privately after the purchase. A note on the back read, "To Emily, who chose kindness when it wasn't easy. You reminded the world that dignity has a voice." Emily blinked away tears. "This means more than you know," she whispered. Harold also handed her the envelope. Inside was a letter from a group of regional dealerships requesting her to speak about building customer trust and empathy. "Looks like the world's been watching," he smiled. That afternoon, Emily stood in front of 200 dealership managers from across the state at a leadership summit. She shared not only the Whitman story but her own, how fear nearly kept her silent, how doing the right thing brought unexpected strength. "The lesson," she said, "is not just about race or age or money. It's about humility. We must greet every person as if they carry the story of someone we love." Because they do. Meanwhile, Malcolm continued growing his foundation. He worked with universities and retail brands to launch a new initiative called Empathy is Power, providing scholarships for students committed to community justice, and corporate grants for businesses that showed documented progress in inclusive service. In their quiet neighborhood, Harold and Lorna's story remained private. But every so often, when they passed by Ariston Motors on their walks, Harold would chuckle, "Remember the guy who told us to try the pre-owned lot?" And Lorna would squeeze his hand and say, "He was just the beginning." Because their story wasn't about revenge. It was about redemption. And for every person who had ever been dismissed because of how they looked, Harold and Lorna had proved something unforgettable, that grace walks tall, even in modest shoes. And when the world finally listens, grace can change everything. Part 6, A Legacy of Respect. Months passed since Emily Torres was promoted, but the lessons of that day lived on. Ariston Motors became more than a showroom, it became a symbol of change. New training programs were instituted under the Grace in Service initiative, spearheaded by Emily herself. Dealerships across the country requested consultations with her to replicate the culture shift they had witnessed. One brisk morning, a national news outlet aired a feature story titled, "The Showroom That Changed Everything." It spotlighted Harold and Lorna's story, Emily's courage, and Malcolm Whitman's unexpected statement of justice. The video quickly went viral. Messages of support poured in, from educators, civil rights advocates, and everyday people who had endured similar experiences. In response, Emily launched a mentoring program for young professionals from marginalized communities, helping them break into high-end sales and management roles. The program, named Bridge Forward, was backed by Malcolm's foundation. Scholarships were established in the Whitmans' names. But the transformation didn't end there. Ariston Motors leadership issued a bold public commitment to diversity, equity, and kindness as their core values. Derek Langston's name, once whispered with reverence in elite sales circles, faded into obscurity. In contrast, Emily's name became synonymous with dignity in the luxury retail industry. At a national conference on ethical business practice, Emily stood on stage, sharing a message that echoed far beyond her words: "We all sell something: cars, clothes, real estate. But our greatest product is how we treat others. The way we make people feel will outlast any transaction. Kindness isn't charity. It's the foundation of leadership." In the audience sat Harold and Lorna, now honorary guests at every Ariston event. As Emily closed her speech, the crowd stood in a unanimous ovation. Harold reached for Lorna's hand, his grip steady, his eyes moist with pride. They had walked into a dealership once and been treated as outsiders. Now, they stood as pillars of a movement. And for every soul who had ever felt invisible, this was proof that one quiet act of kindness could echo into a legacy. It was never just about the car. It was always about the character. Part 7. The ripple effect. As the months unfolded after the pivotal moment at Ariston Motors, the impact of that single event continued to ripple across the country. Journalists, activists, and academics wrote about the incident, analyzing its deeper social implications. Universities used the video footage in ethics courses. Civil rights organizations highlighted Emily Torres's decision to stand up as a shining example of moral courage in everyday life. Harold and Lorna Whitman, once reluctant public figures, were now celebrated as symbols of quiet strength and perseverance. They were invited to panels, community events, and keynote talks, not to recount their humiliation, but to share the power of dignity in adversity. Lorna, once so soft-spoken, stood before hundreds at a youth conference and said, "We never set out to change the world. We just wanted to be treated like human beings." But sometimes, when the right people are watching, the smallest stand becomes a catalyst. Malcolm Whitman, their son and the CEO who orchestrated the bold response, found his company flooded with support from customers who admired not just the cars he designed, but the principles he upheld. Under his guidance, the Whitman Foundation expanded to launch a nationwide campaign, "Judge Less. Listen More." The campaign funded workshops in schools, corporate seminars, and social media storytelling initiatives that encouraged empathy across socioeconomic and racial lines. Meanwhile, Emily Torres embraced her leadership role with humility and grace. In an internal company memo, she wrote, "The moment you think decency is optional is the moment you stop being a leader. We set the tone, not just for sales, but for humanity." The Ariston Motors headquarters underwent a physical transformation too. The very showroom where Harold and Lorna had once been mocked now bore a commemorative plaque near the entrance. It read, "In honor of Harold and Lorna Whitman, whose quiet strength reminded us that dignity cannot be priced." Every new hire at Ariston went through a 3-day empathy immersion program. Employees learned not just about car specs and financing, but also about microaggressions, unconscious bias, and the importance of inclusive communication. Sales increased. Not because of gimmicks, but because of trust. Customers began sharing their own stories, feeling seen, valued, and safe. Other dealerships followed suit. Some out of inspiration, others out of fear of similar public backlash. Regardless of motivation, the culture began to shift. News anchors remarked that Ariston had triggered what they called the showroom standard, an industry-wide reckoning with how people in luxury spaces should be treated. But perhaps the most touching transformation occurred quietly. One morning, a teenage girl named Maya James walked through the doors of Ariston Motors with her mother. She wore jeans, a hoodie, and nervous eyes. Her mother whispered, "Let's just look." A young associate greeted them warmly, no assumptions, no judgment. Maya would later write in her college essay that this was the first time in her life she felt truly equal in a place of luxury. She ended her essay with, "The world doesn't need more perfect people. It needs more Emilys." Back in their home, Harold and Lorna kept a framed copy of that essay on their mantel. When guests asked why, Lorna would simply smile and say, "Because it reminds us that our pain wasn't wasted. It became someone else's hope." And that was the greatest vindication of all. Not revenge. Not retribution. But transformation, proving that sometimes, a single moment of injustice can birth a movement of unshakable grace. In life, we are often reminded that true character is revealed not in moments of ease, but in how we respond to injustice. The story of Harold and Lorna Whitman, and the quiet courage of Emily Torres, teaches us that dignity, empathy, and moral conviction are more powerful than anger or retaliation. When faced with public humiliation, the Whitmans did not lash out, they stood tall, anchored in self-respect. Their son, Malcolm, did not seek vengeance, he chose to teach a lesson in grace. And Emily, a single voice in a room of silence, proved that one act of kindness can challenge an entire system. This story reminds us that no one is too small to make a difference, and no moment is too insignificant to start a transformation. Whether we are young or old, wealthy or struggling, every person deserves to be seen for who they are, not judged by what they wear, how they speak, or the color of their skin. Change begins when we refuse to remain silent in the face of wrongdoing, and when we choose decency even when no one is watching. To all who hear this message, let it sink into your daily life. Speak up when it matters. Treat everyone, from every walk of life, with the kindness and respect they deserve. That is how dignity is defended. That is how justice begins. Speech balloon. Have you ever experienced or witnessed a moment where kindness changed everything? Share your story in the comments. Red heart like this message. Bell subscribe to the channel. Loudspeaker and ring the bell to help us spread compassion and humanity to every corner of the world.